in all of these sort of questions and issues, right? Limited government, low tax, and local control, it's all about the tension between the power of the state or federal government and the power and the responsibility of the individual. And I'm proud to come out on the side of the individual time and time and time again. And maybe equally important, these are the values on which our country was founded. I'm proud on questions, these kinds of questions, to side with the framers of our Constitution. And why did they construct the Bill of Rights? Not because they wanted to tell everyone what to do, because they wanted to tell the government what not to do, what it could not do in the way of infringing on the rights and the power of the individual. So it may sound presumptuous to say, well, the values of the Republican Party are much more closely aligned with those that founded our country and wrote our Constitution. But I think when you're arguing for rights of the individual and the power of the individual over the power of an intrusive, expansive government, we are much more closely aligned. Those beliefs really matter. Now, they also matter even more today, in my opinion. I don't want to say they matter more today than ever, but they're at least as pertinent and relevant today. Because if you just read the headlines for the last 6 months or the last 12 months, you see sort of movement in the opposite direction. Movement toward expansion of the size of government, movement toward the expansion of government power, movement toward greater level of intervention of the government in our economy or even our own family finances. And it certainly begins with the financial service legislation, the TARP legislation that was passed in the fall of last year. I think many people would argue that given the collapse of the finance and the credit system, that was a necessary evil, if you will. Something that had to be done to stabilize the situation. But from there, the path has really continued unabated. An $800 billion stimulus package, all borrowed money, every penny, borrowed from our children in the future. And quite frankly, if you've been reading the headlines lately, it's certainly not clear to me that it's had any positive impact at all. The debt, the $800 billion in debt is still there, but it's very difficult to see what value that's provided. And I'll tell you from experience, and having served in the House for 6 years and the Senate for 6 years, it's pretty hard to spend $800 billion without having something to show for it. And that doesn't mean you can spend $800 billion and create 20 jobs. Now, that may be good for the 20 people who have the job, but that still doesn't mean it was money well spent. Because we have to look at where that $800 billion came from, right? What was the cost? We took $800 billion from working people, whether it's those that pay taxes today or in the future. And so it's hard to imagine that we could have spent what we've spent so far with little or nothing to show for it. We're now have the federal government intervening in the auto industry, a majority shareholder, the Chrysler Corporation, a level of intervention in private competitive markets that we have never seen before. We have proposals for a carbon tax system that has huge economic ramifications. The debate in Congress is whether the carbon tax legislation that's being proposed will cost the average family $1,200 or $3,000 per year. Either way, that's a devastating tax and cost to our economy. We have legislation that's been put forward just in the past few weeks for a government-controlled health system. Healthcare system, 14, 15, 17% of our economy. And suddenly, we're talking about giving the government control and responsibility in making those decisions as never before. all of these taken together represent a dramatic, unprecedented, historic level of expanding the size of government, inevitably raising taxes to pay for that expansion, and equally important, making decisions about controlling decisions in each of these areas of our economy, whether it's auto manufacturing or energy or healthcare. Do we really want to put the government in charge of making so many choices and decisions that could be best left to individuals or families or private competitive corporations? It's about the cost, and it's about control. And I think we're almost at a tipping point, in effect. And that's why it's so important today and next month, and as we move into the elections of 2010, that Republicans stand clearly and voice ourselves on the importance of restraint and limiting government and supporting the individual and leaving more money in your pocket and letting individuals decide in these areas and not the federal government. You know, for years, when there was someone here in West Virginia or a House member or a senator in Washington, when we would raise the concern of, well, you know, you don't want government intervening in your life, you want government meddling in your life, and you don't want government making certain decisions, the media or those on the left would sort of laugh it off. You know, that's an exaggeration. That's not going to happen. We're not talking about giving government that kind of power to make those kinds of decisions. Think again.